How could anyone not like Don Henley, you might ask yourself? After all, he captured most of America's hearts as the Texas heartthrob who became one of the founding members of the rock band The Eagles. I do, by the way, have a full Roots documentary on the story behind The Eagles, how they were formed, and the story behind Hotel California, if you want to check that episode out next. But not only did Don steal musical hearts in the 1970s, he continued to impress us and entertain us for decades, even after the band had their little lover spat in 1980. So it's not completely unfathomable that up-and-coming artists have looked to the Eagles for inspiration and motivation and have wanted to play covers of their songs. But what some people think is unfathomable is the response they've received from Mr. Don Henley himself. Now, when I first heard people complaining about Don in the music industry, I'll admit, I was on Don's side. If I had songs like the Eagles, I'd want to protect them at all costs too. But the more stories I hear about Don Henley and his legal team, the more I have kind of steered away from being on his side. And the more I think it could very well be the case that Don Henley is going to single-handedly ruin the Eagles' music history. Now let's begin by understanding the fact Don Henley is no stranger to the legal system. Don was born and raised in Texas, but in 1970 moved to LA to ruin his life. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Kind of. I mean, after moving to LA, he did get bitten by the lawsuit bug. But after moving to LA in 1970, he was signed to Amos Records under the band named Shiloh. Shiloh only lasted a year due to, quote, creative differences, specifically between Henley and his longtime friend, Richard Bowden. And then in 1971, the band The Eagles were formed and signed to Asylum Records, which was run by a guy named David Geffen. Don would eventually find himself entangled in a lawsuit with David Geffen, but that lawsuit would not be his first taste of the judicial system. In 1980, this was the earliest one I could find, Don Henley was arrested at his home in LA on November 21st and booked for furnishing cocaine to a minor. Don Henley was 33 years old at the time when the paramedics were called to his house on Mulholland Drive. The emergency call said that a woman was having a seizure. When the medics arrived, they found a completely nude 16-year-old girl who claimed that she had overdosed on cocaine. I have to mute that because YouTube will censor my video if I don't, so I'm sorry if muting those words is annoying. But they treated the girl on scene and she required no hospitalization. But because of this, they had to alert the LAPD and the juvenile division, who then dispatched detectives from their unit to Henley's house with an official search warrant. When the juvenile division for exploited children arrived and started searching Don Henley's home, they actually found another minor. But this girl was 15 years old and had allegedly a bunch of drugs, which included 21 grams of 5 ounces of, and an unspecified amount of. Both of these juvenile girls were arrested, obviously. The 16-year-old actually got a prostitution charge, and the 15-year-old was just charged for being under the influence of drugs. Don spent the night in jail, but was then released the next morning on $5,000 bail. So that happened, and then Don decided to write a song about it, called Dirty Laundry. So for the next 9 years or so, Don tried to dabble in a solo career, famously stating that he would reunite with his former bandmates, quote, when hell freezes over, which is not a very nice thing to say, by the way, about the people who literally brought you up from nothing. But then in early 1993, Don was sued by David Geffen and Asylum Records, although it might have been Geffen Records at that time. But Don was sued specifically, I want to specify, not the Eagles. Don was accused of walking out of a contract and failing to deliver 3 promised records, 2 studio records, and a greatest hits record. Geffen claimed Henley's advisor, a man named Irving, who was also his manager, tried to renegotiate Henley's contract while it was still active. He tried to renegotiate 5 albums instead of 3 and claimed that Henley should be due $30 million due to these 2 extra albums. Irving basically said to Geffen, if you don't accept this, then we walk. And I think the main issue here was that his contract was still active. This was not a renegotiation for something that was up, for renewal. The other kink in all of this was that Don had recorded a, quote, unplugged record and tried to pull that off to the label as one of the 2 extra records that they would pay him $30 million for. And Geffen was basically like, No, that's not an actual album, sir. When Henley got all upset that Geffen Records wasn't accepting his plea for $30 million and these 2 extra albums, he just stopped working for them. He just claimed the contract had expired anyway. And Geffen Records said, no, it did not expire. You're walking out on the deal. And then Henley came back at them, accusing them for cheating him out of more than $1 million in royalties. It was such a mess. And while all of this is happening to Don Henley in 1993, another totally separate lawsuit is going on where Glenn Frey is being sued for $5 million for damages by MCA, who said that Glenn owed them 6 more records. So Don and Glenn kind of bond over being sued. And this is all happening too while they're trying to record another record together. But no record label wanted to sign them because of all of these lawsuits going on. And even at one point, their manager, Henley's manager, Irving, was like, well, maybe we'll go back to Geffen Records and, our new album will be part of our settlement with them. Literally just because nobody else would sign them. Then in May of 1994, Don Henley led a new Eagles lawsuit against their former label Elektra, accusing Elektra of trying to release, quote, secretly prepared and unauthorized music. And while all of these lawsuits were going on, they were marketing their biggest tour yet. That was expected to bring in $75 million, which they would need probably to pay for all of these lawsuits. I just want to mention his Malibu beach home literally slid into the ocean after an earthquake, just like the worst juju ever. After he literally lost his entire home, he decided to move back to Texas so he could continue to sue people there. And I'm actually not joking because he does. A lot of people commented that this was positive for Don and they thought he was turning a new leaf. To which Don replied, quote, yeah, but people say that as if I wasn't happy before. I've always been a happy guy. I just had a few axes to grind. In August of 1999, Don Henley sued Paramount Pictures in LA for $1 million. He said that in April of 99, Paramount came to him asking him to record a song for a movie they planned to release called Double Jeopardy. The movie was supposedly going to be about relationships, like some kind of wholesome movie, I guess, but then they changed their mind and decided to rebrand it as an action film. And then the song they initially wanted Don to sing wouldn't be relevant anymore because the vibe was totally different. But mind you, Don never actually recorded this song. Paramount had a contract with him, or I don't know if they even did, but I know that no money was ever moved, and they literally just told him they wanted to do this, so Don wrote the song. He wrote a song called Taking You Home, and then when Paramount changed their mind, the wrath of Don Henley comes out. And he wanted them to pay him not only for the agreed upon fee for the song, but for, quote, additional damages as well. And while that lawsuit is going on, Don Henley was playing a show one night in Little Rock, Arkansas, when allegedly a 43-year-old fan named Marianne Haley stood up to take a photo of him. She says Don Henley didn't want his photograph taken and hit her on the forehead with a maraca. After he hit her on the head, supposedly, he pointed at her and gave her a very unfavorable gesture and told her no more flash photography, please. Marianne Haley filed a lawsuit against Don Henley in the year 2000. In 2002, he banded together with a bunch of other artists in an attempt to, quote, change the rules of the music industry. Which isn't a horrible movement, by the way, let me say this. There's a lot that's wrong with the music industry for sure, but I think the way Don went about this, and also given his history with all of these lawsuits, was just unsettling. In January of 2002, he literally led this movement with Sheryl Crow, John Fogerty, Jeff Beck, and Courtney Love. They all went to Sacramento to lobby the California legislature to include musicians in a labor code that would allow entertainers to free themselves from any contract after 7 years. Now, this was obviously a very passionate topic for Don Henley, considering this was his very first lawsuit with Geffen over the fact that he was trying to renegotiate a contract before it was up. And Henley was very much so the leader of this movement, given his history with this topic. Now, Irving, who was his manager, was also there, by the way. He was front and center with the whole Geffen lawsuit, too. And Henley's movement ended up being faced with a lot of criticism. A lot of people thought he was just being whiny and bitter over the fact he tried to renegotiate a contract before it was formally up. People said it's up to the label to decide a duration of a contract, and if you don't agree with it, you just shouldn't sign at all. All of that was coming at Don Henley, to which he made a statement in response, and he said, quote, "This has been called a rock star issue, a bunch of spoiled stars whining that they don't get paid enough. But we're doing this for anyone who has ever signed a record and anyone who ever will." And many people responded to that statement saying they were shocked at how many new artists would just sign anything without reading it and without consulting anyone to explain anything they didn't understand about the contract. And this is just a way of life. You just don't sign contracts if you don't read them or understand them. Now, Don, I think, got his feathers a little ruffled at the insinuation that he had signed a contract with Geffen without ever reading it and without having proper representation at the time. But he powered through for all of 2002, being extremely outspoken about how unfair and greedy the music business was. And one person in particular took note of Don's theatrics, his old bandmate, Don Felder. In May of 2003, Don Felder sued Don Henley, accusing him of the exact same greedy practices Don Henley had been preaching against for the past year. Don Felder's lawsuit claimed that Don Henley had cheated him out of his share of various album and concert earnings. Now, this lawsuit didn't come out of nowhere. There had been bad blood between Don Henley, Glenn Frey, and Don Felder for a while, since 1974, actually, when they fired Don Felder. The lawsuit by Felder also claimed that Henley and Frey, quote, bullied him into one-sided agreements, divvying up band profits, withholding financial information, and then ultimately firing him without cause in 74. The official statement by Don Felder to Don Henley after he filed this lawsuit said, quote, "It is absolutely the height of hypocrisy for him to attempt to reinvent himself as the, quote, champion for artist rights." And he sought past earnings of more than $50 million. And he also called to dissolve the official Eagles Corporation, Eagles Limited. Now, the attorney representing Don Henley said that Felder, quote, shouldn't have signed the contracts if he didn't know what was in them or if he didn't agree to them. Literally the same thing that they're on the California legislature steps lobbying against. They also, by the way, countersued Felder for, quote, breach of contract because he wanted to write a book. It just is crazy and weird. Now, all of this gets worse because they also started arguing about profits and money movements since their 1994 reunion. And Felder said that Henley and Frey would take about 30% stakes of the profits from 1994 onward, which was double what Felder and Timothy Schmidt and Joe Walsh received. The lawsuit accused Henley and Frey of also engaging in self-dealing efforts to divert money from the Eagles Corporation into other companies for them to pocket more money and also excessively compensate their manager, Irving. Remember him? Henley's attorney simply said Don and Glenn were entitled to more of the profits because they founded the band and wrote most of the songs. In true Don Henley fashion, though, he could not go more than a couple of years without another lawsuit. In 2006, Don Henley teamed up with a very wealthy Dallas oil man and filed a lawsuit in federal court in Waco, Texas, to block construction of 2 proposed power plants. The lawsuit accused this company, TXU, of violating the Federal Clean Air Act by failing to consider alternatives to burning coal. Then in 2007, Don Henley insinuated he wanted to go country in Nashville. And this wasn't totally out of nowhere because he had done duets with country artists, and Joe Walsh had actually joined Kenny Chesney at one point. They all performed at the CMAs, I think, for a show, but it was just kind of a weird, possible transitional period for them. But at the end of the day, Don said he was just mainly focused on his family and his daughter's birthday. And I think it was around 2010, though, Don Henley sued another artist for re-recording a few of his songs. They sued him for copyright infringement. Yeah, it was 2010. And for the next few years, Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Joe Walsh, and Tim Schmidt continued to play some shows together. In 2014, Don Henley decided to sue a clothing maker Duluth Trading Company, saying the clothing maker took it to the limit with an ad that Henley claims illegally traded on his name. He said Duluth Trading sent customers an ad for their, quote, Henley-styled shirts with text that read, Don Henley, take it easy. Don Henley claimed this violated copyright law by using his name without permission or a license. Also, in 2014, Don and Glenn sued a New York man because they said he was peddling bootleggings of his record. I don't know, it was weird. They sent a cease and desist order to a concert venue demanding that a show that used the name The Eagles be canceled. Now, the guy putting on the show canceled the show, but they still sued him anyway. 2 years after this, Glenn Frey passed away, and Don Henley said the Eagles were done forever. Even though Don was convinced the Eagles were done, Don's involvement with the law will never be done. In fact, it was about to get a lot worse. There will be a sequel to this video where we talk about the biggest lawsuit yet, and we will also talk about how Don Henley has been treating artists who want to cover the Eagles' music and want to keep their music alive. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so that you are notified every time I post a new episode. And I will see you on the next Roots Rockumentary where we talk about the modern day Don Henley.
Hungry for the road all my life, thirsty for adventure all my youth, chasing all my